Welcome to this episode of the School of Becoming. Today, I have the pleasure to introduce to you Nilofer Merchant. Nilofer is a former tech executive that worked for companies like Apple and Autodesk, and she's also the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Power of Onlyness: Make Your Wild Ideas Mighty Enough to Dent the World. I hope you will enjoy this conversation with Nilofer, where she will talk about the idea of onlyness and how we can identify and stay true to our onlyness despite everything that is going on in the world.
So what I thought I'd do today is walk through some slides, some thoughts, some frameworks I've created over the last few years around onlyness, and just to tee it up so we have a common framework between us of what do we mean by it, how did I come up with it, how many people are affected by it, that kind of thing, just so we kind of see the size and scope of it, and then we'll dig deeper into your questions, okay? So the work of onlyness is really about this notion of being valued. Valued has two major themes running through it from my perspective. One is an economic one, and one is a spiritual one. So onlyness flows from those two integrated places to say each of us standing in that spot in the world, only one stands, has a set of ideas and capacities to contribute to an economy. It is how we connect ourselves to the world, and it is the way in which we know what it is we value in order for us to add value in the world. I came up with the language about it. It's now been 7 or 8 years, and even trademarked the word. And the reason is there's no language today to currently center correctly on this spot. So in fact, Ingo did it a little while ago where he said unique. Unique is a really interesting word, which was probably the closest we could get to onlyness until we had this language. And the closest, but not quite right. And the reason why it's not quite right is unique is always relative, right? So if I am, just using me as an example for a second, if I am the only woman in a room full of corporate board members, almost always that would make me unique. And people would, in fact, turn to me sometimes in meetings. I can tell you all sorts of wonderful stories, wonderful being sarcastic in that case, of people saying to me, Nilofer's perspective is so unique because she's a woman, and actually saying that. And I would cringe inside because 52% of the global population is women. So it's the least unique thing about me, right? So what they were saying was, relative to us who are in power, you are unique. And I wanted to actually not center the room, which would make me the only one. I wanted to center the person and the source of all value creation with this beautiful image, in fact, by Nathan Sawa, to say, how do we actually recognize that which we inherently have to offer? Now, people sometimes say, you've been working on this question for a long time. How did you start on it? I can tell both personal and professional stories. I'll start with the professional one. And then if any of you have read my work, you already know the personal one. But professionally, I started my career at Apple Computer. I say start because I was 20 something years old, still working my way through college. A friend of mine helped me get a job there. And I was actually looking for a market research role because my undergrad, I was doing poli-sci and then econ. And I wanted to get a job in market research. And the guy who hired me said, well, I need a market researcher, but I only have a rec open for an admin. Would you be willing to take that role? And he sort of dismissed the admin stuff like, oh, it's only like I'm really easy. It's only 5 hours a week. Like, you can get that done and then still do all this other work. And so I took the role. And by the way, funny story about being an admin. I suck at being an admin. So after a while, he actually took all the work back off my desk. Like, no, it's okay. Here, I'll take my own calendar back, because I was awful at it, but not by intention. And quite often I would go into conference rooms as the admin, and really meant to be the note taker. And then in one particular meeting I'm thinking of, he had said, this meeting, I need you to show up in the market research thing. We really need your ideas because we're building out the strategy. We need a whole bunch of new perspectives because we're stuck. And so I did the relevant sort of reading. I thought about what questions I should bring into the room, et cetera. And I was really like ready. And in fact, other people had been told, what my role would be in that room, which was not as the admin, but wearing that market research role hat. And in that meeting, I noticed no one would make any eye contact with me. And it was as if I was invisible. And I remember thinking, is it because I'm not raising my hand high enough? Or is it that I'm being sort of too eager in that golden retriever kind of way that I sometimes can be, of wanting so much to be loved that, I'm just running around trying to seek approval. And maybe that's why they were dismissing me. But what I did notice in that room is that the people who got called on, the people who got heard, were the people who were highly credentialed. So they had, lots of degrees, and they had the right title. And I thought, that's it. That's all I need to do. I just need to get more education, more titles, etc. And it turned out that after 25 years of being in different rooms, so this is now Apple, Autodesk, Adobe, Symantec, Nokia, blah, blah, blah. So GE, so on and so on, getting asked to come into all these different rooms, there was always one group that was heard, and then the large group that wasn't. And I started observing that it had very little to do with whether or not the quality of their ideas were good, but whether or not they had power and status in that room. And sometimes that meant being the loudest person in the room, person who talked the most and just kind of took up airspace. Sometimes it meant having the most titled person in the room, etc. And what was missing in those cases, and again, my job at the time was to come in and do sort of strategic turnaround. So it was Nokia's CEO asking me to come in and talk to him because they couldn't decide their future. And in fact, I was the one who helped him realize he needed to sell to Microsoft. But it was those kinds of situations, very difficult future-esque kind of situations of our entire company's at risk, our entire product line is at risk. And I would say, well, what have you already tried? What have you already talked to? And they would say, oh, well, we've been working on this problem for 3 years, 4 years, 5, some long period of time. And I would go be like, this group? And they would say, yes, absolutely, this group. And I go, okay, let's try a different group. And quite often in my contract, in fact, I would write down that I would own the process. And this was after many years of learning I needed to be able to direct that. I would own the process, and they would, of course, sign off on that contract because, by the way, who wants to own the process, right? So they would be like, oh, yeah, whatever. That's like a little fine line of her little quirkiness. Fine, I'll sign that contract. And then time would come, and I'd say, okay, so now we're going to invite everyone in the division to come and participate with us in problem solving. And they would look at me like, can we undo that contract? Because they were so anxious at the idea that some random person, that customer service person who took critical calls, the sales rep who was always complaining about their quota, the admin, whatever it was, they were so anxious that this sort of random person would be in the room and they would have chaos and not actually creativity. And I would say, let us run the process and you will get the creativity you need, because the answer, you've already tried to find the answer amongst this group of people. And that means that we need to ask broader questions and understand the situation differently in order for us to actually understand what problem we need to solve. And ultimately, we need to execute against that problem. So that same group of people that are considered on the outside circle actually need to be included. And when I started doing that work, I realized this is the irony of originality, right? That some of us are seen as different, and then some of us are seen as distinct. And so instead, in fact, Ingo, to offer you language, so I always use the word distinct instead of unique. So what is true to each person, because I'm actually centering correctly, and I want you to also. I want us to stop viewing some people through a subjective lens and as a subject of their own story, so that we move away from any sense of otherness where there is an us and a them to a sense of onlyness, and say, how do we start to organize so that that thing that only I have to offer and that thing that only you have to offer, if they're the same, like if we're connected by meaning, that we can then join a network and become change makers together. So it's about distributed power. It's about really tapping true originality, not the way it's sometimes described, and to allow contributions from many places, but towards shared goals. And the data says that somewhere between 50 and 70% of us at any given time at work are denied our voice. Sometimes we do it to ourselves. where we say, gosh, nobody wants to hear that opinion, or who am I to offer something, or I'm not that only. We cover in different ways. And it's not just traditional groups of people who are underserved and underseen. Even 45% of straight white men cover. So it's the football game conversation on a Tuesday morning like this, instead of maybe saying, I just spent the weekend with the kids and gardened and loved it, right? So whatever way in which we cover, we do it to assimilate to group norms, whatever that group norm is. Now, so I just gave you sort of big, like, here's how I kind of came to it and my perspective from a business perspective. I thought I would talk about the big shift next. I know I just did that really fast, right? So what it is, why it was a necessary new framework, how much it affects people. But really, we need to talk then about what is the real shift here. And I'll tell you, my favorite thing to do in times of stress, anytime at all, actually, is to watch like Law and Order obsessively, Closer, any of these kinds of series. Right now, I'm doing NCIS over again. Anything where I know what the storyline is going to be in 45 minutes, we're going to have resolution and like closure. That's like what I do in times of stress. So I'm telling you, my favorite story from that about how to think about onlyness is, okay, so in all the Law and Order series, there is a lead character who screeches up to the building where the bad guys are towards the end and knows that she's supposed to wait for backup. But does she ever wait for backup? She does not. Olivia Benson is always running into the building where the bad guy is. And I'm always like, were you not here last season? Do not go in there alone. And that is the very sense I want you to get about onlyness, is don't go in there alone, because the way that we are made to feel like the lonely only actually perpetuates this problem of not being seen. Because those of us who are the only ones in a room will feel excluded and watched and pressured to conform. And this is research that Rosabeth Moss-Kanter, who's also a Harvard professor, I read her in the 80s. She published this in the 70s. This data is incredibly well known, that for those of us who are underseen and underserved especially, we will conform to the group norm, undoubtedly, if we go in alone. And this is why all the research, I get so irritated, right, by all the research that says, just do it like it's a Nike ad. And I'm like, no, that will not help you. It's like saying, go slam yourself against an electric fence wire. Not smart. And so this body of work on onlyness is to say, how do you belong to the world so that you can go together? And so it's recognizing whatever it is that is true to you. And I usually formulate that question by saying, what is both my history and experience, as well as my visions and hopes? And from those two places, both my roots and the light from, to which I'm growing, allows me to know, here's what it is I care about. And it's when we belong and we understand sort of who we are, we can take our place in a circle and become more of ourselves. The way we might want to think about this, so using my MBA kind of background, I always joke about myself whenever I do 2x2s, because, that's the way we sometimes teach this stuff, but it's actually kind of ironic that I make fun of them and then still use them. So onlyness is the combination of two things. It is both voice and how you belong. So voice, think if I have this grid now, right, 2x2 in front of us. So think low and high for voice, and then low and high for belonging. When you have low voice, meaning you can't even hear what the hell you care about, and you don't belong to an organization, so you show up and somebody just says, do that thing, that job description that you were asked to do, then you show up as disengaged, right? So it's the worker whose job it is to take your paint chip, put it in a can and mix it, put it in a thing, it mixes it and hands it back to you. They have this almost automated job. They're disengaged. Then there's when we have high voice, but low belonging. It's Elon Musk. He is both an isolated figure, an arrogant figure, a heroic figure, some would argue, but he's not he doesn't care if anybody else is following him. He cares about Elon Musk, right? So it's high voice. It's an American culture. It's individuality, as we often describe it, because it's sort of like the chest thumping, melomaniacal kind of megamaniacal. Is that the word? English is my fourth language, so every now and then I get the wrong word, but I think you know what I'm referring to. I'll get it in a second. Then there's also when you have low voice and you belong, you do it at a great cost, right? You belong like you belong to the Borg of Star Trek. So you are one of many, but no one can actually hear anything that is very specific and true to you. But it's when you have high voice, so you know what it is you care about, and you belong, that then you can have impact. And this is the cornerstone of what Onlyness is focused on. It's called personal agency according to all the theoretical work, but I find it very interesting that the word personal is used here when it is both tied to voice and the way in which we belong to the world, right? So like all humans, we're social beings. And so it's funny that we call it personal agency when it's an incredibly social act. So this slide we can return to at any point if it's helpful, because sometimes it's helpful to kind of even think about like where people are stuck on their onlyness. Sometimes it's because they think, oh, I have no voice whatsoever, or the opposite, which is I am the only voice that counts. So quite often we'll be in the high voice, we're struggling with voice questions, but it's the combination of the two. Okay. It's when these two things come together that we start to connect in much more meaningful ways, right? So quite often we think about identity in kind of more limited ways. So we think about it as like, if I'm a woman, I might belong to a women's group. If I'm a woman of color, I might belong to a person of color group at work. I might belong as an admin. I might belong as a CEO, right? These are all silos. But when we belong by onlyness, then we can be connected by our ideas, by what we care about. And so the way in which we join together is not based on the power of place in an organization or the power of place in society, but that place in the world only one stands, and then join together through some kind of meaning and purpose. So that's like, I'm going to end this share and then it's just us. So I thought what I would do then is to focus on a conversation about, okay, how do we bring this idea home? And I know Ingo's got some thoughts about how to get us started on that conversation, but it's of course meant to be super interactive. That's one of the reasons we did it sort of fast download. So we can return to those or other case studies too, by the way. So that's still available to all of us.
Thank you, Nilofer. And once again, welcome everyone. That was super fascinating. I find like this is almost like there's a little bit of a paradox, right? To which extent can I be myself and to which extent am I part of something bigger? And in your presentation, I felt like you were walking the line. Kind of, it was, at least that's how I perceived it. But that said, I wondered how it resonated for all of you. So for all of you who are in the session today, I would like you to invite to write what came up for you. If you have questions or comments in the chat, and we will take some of these and hopefully start having a little bit of an interactive conversation with Nilofer to dig a little bit deeper on onlyness, but also see how we can find it, utilize it, bring it to life, support others in discovering it, and make an impact, not only for us, but also in our organizations. So if you want, comment in the chat. You had 30 seconds in the beginning to come up with a question or an intention for the session. So think about that and let us know what you want to talk about.
People are typing. I can see mad typing.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Oh, Clifford started us off with, I was about to start a nonprofit with interested funders, but the COVID-19 shifted the entire product line. Reinventing now. He's interested in how he can express his onlyness in redirecting, in rebranding his proposal.
Well, so two thoughts. One is just on branding. I I'm not a big fan of interweaving the idea of onlyness and branding, right? And because the reason is, first of all, we have a word called branding. So we can use that word. We don't need to come up with a new word for branding, even though people love this concept of onlyness to talk about branding. Branding is like mixing the gift with the packaging of the gift. And so just for a minute, like those can be one and the same. Like you can package something beautiful with something that really represents that outside thing. But sometimes branding can get us distorted away from the real thing. So I just want to make that distinction so that we focus on what is it that is true to you, right? What is it your gift, using that language. And so I have an Onlyness canvas, which we can actually, Ingo, we can share in, it's published, it's free, it's available. And it asks 2 questions and then asks those 2 questions to come together. So the first question is, what is it you value about yourself? So what are some experiences and things that have happened in your life that teaches you what you care about? So just the other day, someone shared with me their Onlyness canvas. We did a consultation together, and he had shared that for many years, one of the things that he did was seek approval from his bosses, and kept saying and doing everything that he thought his bosses wanted, and was then at home drinking and had to go into recovery. And it took him quite a bit of time to realize he kept choosing other people over what he wanted and what his wife wanted, what his kids needed, right? All that stuff. And I said, well, what did that teach you about yourself? You know, just that choice that you've just now made to go into recovery. What did that teach you about yourself? He says, it's so easy for me to give away my voice. And usually then when there's stress, I can almost always go back to voice to go, you know, I'm actually giving away my ideas and what I think I care about because I want approval from someone else. And just because that's an origin story of his, he can kind of then spot that in other patterns, right? If it comes up again. And then the second question, so that was one, is what is your history, right, that informs who you are to this date? So what is it you value about yourself? The second is, if I had the Disney wand, the one that in the movies turns pumpkins into carriages and mice into horses, and you can do anything with your magic wand, what would you do? And almost always, when I ask people that question, they have an answer. And that instinct, that first answer, is quite often a clue as to what you most care about. And so it's your history and experiences, sort of what has informed you. And then what is it that you most want to do? These are both different sides of value, right? What has shaped you up to this point and what you want. Who have you been? Who are you becoming? And you kind of fuse those 2 together and you kind of squinch at it. This is the hard part, actually, to go, where is the way in which I can add that value to the world now? And so for those of you that do know my personal story, and I see a couple of faces and names of folks who have been following along, I got an arranged marriage at a really early age, meaning I was supposed to get an arranged marriage. And early on in my life, my mother had said this to me, I fully expected it, etc. But at some point I had also decided I wanted an education. So all I asked was for my family to ask the guy, so not that he would say yes, but to ask the guy if I could get an education. And I had gone ahead and applied to a university and gotten in and done a deferment, all, you know, without my family knowing, in the hopes that by the time I got to arranged marriage, somehow I could magically like stitch these, what my family wanted and what I wanted together. And my mother would not ask because she didn't want to put at risk sort of the conversation and negotiations that were going on around the dowry, which was about her financial security. And so I left home for what I thought would be an hour. It turned out to be not an hour. It turned out to be for the rest of my life. And I suddenly had to go figure out how to be on my own and make it in the world. And that story has informed me, right? First of all, I know I'm one of the more stubborn people I've ever met, and so is my mother. But it also tells me, like, there are certain moments when I know what I know what it is I care about, and I have courage and conviction to follow through on it. So it tells me something about myself, both negative and positive. And that informs, then I can go, am I being stubborn here? Is it stubborn for a good reason? What's that? So you see how that history informs me? And then I have a vision that each of our voices can actually count, that we have a multitude of ideas. And I come at it from an economic and human perspective, right? That the multiplicity of ideas and wealth and capacity and worth of all these people can count, so that we can create more and better value in the world. And I combine those two, and you can almost just back into how I got to the concept of onlyness and why I care so much about power structures. You can see it in my own story. This is not to say that's your story, right? I'm just giving you an example to kind of go squinch it together, and you can go, oh, here is a way in which I can add value into the world. So the template's available, and I also do consults for those people that get stuck, but I perfectly give it away because I want you to be able to do this exercise on your own.
Connecting to what you just said, Nilofer, there were a couple of questions, some centered around voice, how you can find your voice. And I think you answered that by looking into, okay, what's your past? What is it that you value? But also like looking into, okay, where am I going to go? What's like my magic wand wish? And how can I connect these two? And like the way I understood you is this is like the source basically of your voice. There was a question here from Nancy who asked, when there is peer pressure amongst colleagues to silence themselves, how can a leader promote voice and belonging?
So leaders' jobs are to actually create the cultural context in which voice can count, right? So your job is to create that belonging. And so it's from the very first moment. We actually did it just now when we started this session, right? We said, take a minute to even organize your question, because we want that to be part of this. We didn't say what a lot of leaders do, which is, I'm going to talk at you for about 45 minutes of an hour, and then I'm going to ask at the very end, do you have any questions? As if we're going to invite you only in that last 15 minutes to engage in an interactive thing. We teed it up by intentional design to say, organize, think about that. We primed it. And then we said, and we want to hear from everyone. And then we're creating the space for that, and we're encouraging it. So this is like a way in which voice can just be designed into the process. It could be when you're structuring brainstorming meetings, we make sure we use Post-its as a way of generating ideas versus having each person talk, because we know that when each person talks, we usually only hear the same 30% of the people. And so we can say, you know what, we're going to do 15 minutes of brainstorming on Post-its, put them on the wall. During a break, we're going to organize those notes. Then we'll come back and actually make sure we look at this full body of ideas, right? So that is a way in which we can structurally design. So what we're talking about is basically good facilitation that allows people to engage. The book I've referred to a lot over the years, like it's totally marked up, and I'm just now looking for it so I can see it's Sussman, Sussman, and I want to say it's facilitating work. But it has, I want to say like 50 exercises, and I still can flip to any page and be inspired by an idea and use that for either how you spark an idea, how you shape that idea with collaborative work, or how you, ship that out into the world. So that from an execution perspective, strategy and execution are one.
Thank you, Nilofer. And I think it also ties back to a comment that Melanie made in the chat, which is, and I think it builds on that, this idea of noticing yourself, like oneself being a tool. A facilitator has this capacity of noticing him or herself and noticing, okay, like my body tells me, my emotions tells me like something is wrong here, and listen to that and then use that and articulate it, because oftentimes I think somebody has to, and then really opening up the space and facilitating the space for others. Rahab asked, how do I discover my distinct value that can benefit the world?
So I think what we're talking to is the onlyness canvas, right? Like it's the answer those two questions. And then here's the thing, sometimes people get really stuck on, they kind of think about it as, they get stuck in a bunch of ways. So the one though that most people get stuck on is they kind of expect it to be bigger somehow than they are. Like what they have to offer just isn't enough. And so they'll be like, yeah, I care about this, but since no one else cares about this, or no one else I can find right now cares about this, no one else must care about this. And they negate themselves first
Mhm.
right? And you're like, dude, like, first of all, you have to care. So vote for yourself first before other people can vote for that idea. You have to actually like be like, whoa, I got this idea. So you have to give yourself that freedom of voice to be like, even if right now it seems early or nascent and still burgeoning, because by the way, all ideas show up as early and nascent and burgeoning, right? They never show up fully formed. So then who could you share that with to say, hey, I have this idea I'm thinking about, what do you think? And have safe enough people surround you and belonging that they can help you develop that idea so it becomes more fully fledged.
I think that's an interesting point. And Kathy here commented that she's struck by the concept of relational labeling. And I think there is like a codependence in there in what you just said in terms of what can I actually express about myself that is still true to me, while it also like is part of a bigger conversation, because the conversation has to start somewhere, and that's you. But can you expand a little bit on this idea of on relational labeling?
Yeah. So let me just use a story from the past. So when I was working on what was my second book, because I've now done three, the second book was published by Harvard. I had been writing about social. Social was more than social media, which was really commonly understood back then as only they attached the word social to media. And I was like, actually, social can be a way in which we co-create the future, right? The future's not created, the future's co-created. And social can be the way in which it affects every part of the value chain, Michael Porter's concept of the value chain. And actually it can become value creation circles. So instead of you selling to a customer out there, the customer can help you co-create things. So I had been working on that idea for a while, and I went to a guy who was really well known in the book world and had offered to help. And I went to him and said, here's what I'm thinking of, but I really need a great name, kind of, get it out there, blah, blah, blah. And his like epiphany was naming. Like it's his gift. His ideas are not that strong, but his gift of naming is exceptional. So I asked him if he would be willing to help me, and he said, sure. And this is what he said as I described the idea. Then he said, as a brown woman, your chances of being seen in the world are next to nothing. And then I remember, because we were in an old church, he stared off at this sort of archangel thing for a while. And I was like, okay, then he's going to come back with, and so here's how you defeat that or whatever. But instead he was like, yeah, so if you need to be edgier in order to be heard. But if you're edgy, then the people who need to accept you in order to do your ideas won't actually hear you. So yeah, never going to happen. And now this is a guy that is highly regarded. You guys probably all know his name, first name, kind of thing. And I walked across from that room to a group that happened to be at a hotel across the way. And I shared the vignette. And not one person in that group said to me, what a bunch of fucking baloney, right? Why would he even say that? That's bullshit. Instead, they all sat there silently and like stared at their device and kind of wandered away. And I thought, oh my God, it must be true. And for 2 or 3 months, I was a train wreck, because it took, in fact, Megan Smith, who used to be the CTO in Obama's administration, she happened to be overhearing me talk to someone else. And I had shared this vignette as a reason for why, by the way, I would never be heard in the world anymore. So I was working on the next generation. So I was going to focus all my attention on mentoring the next generation. And she was like, well, repeat this story. And we happened to be backstage or something. And I told her a story, and she goes, okay, if no one's told you this yet, that story is bullshit. And I was like, are you sure? Are you sure it's bullshit? Because by then I had fully internalized his point of view as my point of view, right? His truth as my truth. So, by the way, get better friends like Megan in your life, and have people check you, right? So that early moment where you're saying, is this who I am? Some people can go, yeah, that's his bias. That's his, in fact, incredibly destructive bias. And he's now trying to impose that on you. And you need to be like, nope, you can take that little sucker. Here's the gift back. Thank you very much. And walk away and recognize, and to put a little period on the end of that sentence story, I then got chosen to speak on TED stage. And when they announce it, when they do announce the TED speakers, they tell you months in advance. And then they have like this one-day reveal where they reveal everyone together. And they basically promise you to secrecy. So the reveal is really a reveal. I probably got a couple hundred emails that day of like, congratulations, you've been picked, yada, yada, yada. His was the first one in my inbox. And so I wrote back, because I am this person. So I thought you said that as a brown woman, comma, I would never be heard in the world, question mark. Doesn't this disprove your thesis? Period. And he wrote back and he said, did that bother you? Did that bother you? And I was like, yeah, it really did. And by the way, you are shitting on people. You are actually telling people they don't get to count on a regular basis, and you don't even hear yourself. So don't do it again, right? But the relational aspect is, I believed him because I trusted him. And how many of us have had parents or teachers or friends tell us stuff that is absolutely not true? And we have internalized that because we so want to belong. And then at some point we get to decide, actually, that's their voice and not my own. And that process of disassociating from people who are actually harming us and then coming back to who we are is the greatest gift we have. Man, it's a life's work.
Wow, that's a fascinating story, Nilofer. And it's amazing how other people's affect us without like them even realizing that they affect us. And one question in the chat here from Kim, I think, ties into that. Well, she asked is, obviously it's important to reframe how we see ourselves and others so we can define our own inclusion and belonging and include other people. But how do you do that? Because in your case, it was like somebody did that to you or gave you that comment, people ignore you, you gathered evidence and you had this kind of disbelief. And then over the years, it kind of was chipped away onto this pinnacle moment where you got this invite. But how can we do that without like being invited by Ted or without having like necessarily the friend that tells us like a different story or a different view?
Well, so this is where, when I said Olivia needs to go into the building with her crew instead of all by herself, right? I think the key is to know who your crew is. So for the last several years, one of the possibilities I've had is to know that you can build a community of people who see you, right? And to exit communities of people who don't. To exit groups of people who say, you must not be that good. And by the way, haven't we all belonged professionally to organizations that do that, right? And we're like, well, we should be tough enough to handle it, kind of thing. And I'm like, dude, why would you hang around in a place that basically says, you're not that good, instead of seeing what is good about you? And so the crafting has been, to the last few years, have really been me kind of like narrowing down a circle of people. In fact, how we met, Ingo, right, is Newman, who I adore. Newman said, I heard him do your event and I love him. And so when he said, you're going to love Ingo and his tribe is going to love you and we should all hang together, I was like, Newman said, yes, he's part of my inner circle. And I trust him. I trust his take. I trust who he would put me next to, right? All that. And so you get to be seen when you also choose really carefully who's in your inner circle. Newman knows my wishes and desires and what I'm working on. So he also knows, okay, so here's another person who can be a part of that community and you guys are going in the same direction. And so you can help each other. And so getting more selective, more intentional about that inner circle is the gift. That's the real opportunity, is to know who serves, and not in this, I'm not saying like shallow, right? I'm not saying I'm only going to have like people who love me or something next to me. I'm saying choose people who can push you. And as they push you, they're pushing you in a direction you actually want to go, not push you back into a box.
Right. And I think it's interesting because when I listen to you, it seems to start with you giving yourself the voice and trusting yourself to actually express yourself in a way that you can be seen for your onlyness, and that others can then start to engage with you, and together you start to build and basically like connect. Which brings me to like a couple of questions that we had in the chat here about how you can connect your onlyness. We talked a little bit about that earlier, to a larger system, and that's or by Kay, she asks more specifically, how do I turn my onlyness into a successful, soul-satisfying, world-changing business? So very small thing to do, but what's your thought on that? So how onlyness and system connect?
So I'll just tell you one vignette of someone I was working with. So they had come to me. They had done some sort of purpose-based work inside a big company. In fact, had asked if the company could hire me as her coach. And I said, no, I won't take money from the company because my only objective is you, just so we're clear. And then she went through and we did this canvas together. And what was really clear is she loved this sort of business modeling. She loved purpose kind of work, real purpose work. She had actually done it 3 times before, and other companies had benefited from it. And what she actually wanted was companies to be, many companies to do it. So I said, well, actually, that would mean that you would set up like a center where every time you work with a company, you're allowed to share the results of that. And you become the piloting house for every company that wants to do purpose-based business models. And you would agree with the firms that you would be able to publish it and share it and so on. So you become the learning mechanism for everyone. And then you can affect, let's say, 30 organizations a year instead of 1. And she's like, oh my God, that is what I want, right? But but what she really, like her struggle, right, was she wanted income. She wanted a job. And so she was like, please have this company pay for you so I can learn how to have a better job within this company. And I was like, that's not really what you want, right? So it goes always back to your onlyness and being able to ask that aspirational question of the wand and knowing what it is that only you offer. And so the fact that she had actually done it 3 times for 3 different things showed me she actually understood the model of it and valued that about herself, and that she wanted to do this at scale. And I was like, well, then you don't stick to one company. And that was just a way for us then to design a business model behind it, to then say, okay, what would be the way in which you would architect an organization to do what it is you most want to do? But it goes back to you hearing yourself. And of course, that's why I think sometimes you do need someone to kind of hear you out. And that's why I offered consultations as a service, because I think sometimes it does help for someone just to be able to go, here's what you're actually saying, right? Versus what you think you're saying, to push you on your own thinking. Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful example of like how somebody else can help you actually to see what you might not even see. And I think it's a little bit, I don't know, what's the role of others? I mean, you are doing this professionally as a consultant, but you shared now 2 stories where it was actually not only about the individual figuring out what their onlyness is, but actually somebody from the outside saying, hey, wait a second, like there is something.
Right. And so that's exactly right. You've actually gotten to it, right? Which is when we talk about voice, when we talk about belonging, do we know how to put ourselves in situations where we can belong as ourselves? Because most of us have been in settings where we sometimes think, oh, do I have to give up me in order to belong to you? Right? Unhealthy relationships galore. And then, or am I the only voice here that counts? And so am I not asking enough to be a part of something, where team us matters more than team me? And it's that combination of navigating who you are and how you express your own voice and how you find your people. And it's letting go to be like, you can go out to the outside circle. I don't really think about it as sort of jettisoning friends, but like you can be out there just further away from my psyche. And then there's an inner circle that is crafted and very much intentional, to say, when I'm with you, I show up more as myself. And this is actually, I think, Ingo, why the School of Belonging is so important, is because there's a group of people here who are seeking together, right? Seeking that. And so you can go, oh, I get what you're working on and I'm working on the same thing. And so maybe we can also partner up.
That's, I think that's an interesting aspect. And here, Kathy commented on this idea of like belonging, but also of approval versus agency. We all look for approval while we all try to take agency. So in a large organization, when you are with others, what are your ideas about balancing that and approaching that topic?
Yeah, so it's a really, in fact, this last weekend, I just wrote a piece about approval and seeking praise out from people. And I said, the thing is, um, when we center correctly on the source of onlyness, then we know here's what it is I can offer value on. But of course, I'm not going to do it by myself. So who are the other people with whom I belong? And I drew it as you and yours, and then sort of like flower petalish, so that the you was the thing that you centered, and then recognizing that yours is the group to whom you belong. And sometimes we do this thing where we ask the wrong question of the wrong people. So we ask our boss to approve of us instead of first approving of ourselves, right? So if we give all the approval power to our boss, for example, then we're saying, my voice doesn't really count, only yours does. And then when you bring it up, you say to equal, then you say, here's what I'm thinking. What do you know and think too? And you start doing this co-creative process of, here's what I know, here's what I see, etc. Here's questions I have. And then the other person can go, yeah, I know this is happening in this other organization, or here's what else I'm thinking about. And all of a sudden you start to come together. And that's what we're talking about, right? The evening of power, to say, own your piece and don't just give it all away. And also fold in the opportunity to be in community with people, because that's how everything gets better.
And I think there are a couple of comments on this. I can't read them all out, but I think what we just talked about struck a nerve with people. And it's like
Yeah.
this whole aspect of relation and kind of managing that dynamic, which is, I think, something that is really intriguing. I wonder, and as we're approaching the full hour, when we talked a lot about the individual and how we can do that as individuals, but how can we support others in this? We talked a little bit about this in like a team or a meeting setting, but if you lead a startup or a company, how can you support like the larger organization, especially let's say you have 50 or 100,000 people in being only as a group?
I think there's two questions you just threaded together, and I'm going to see if I can untangle it a little bit. One is, I think what you're asking is, what's the super skill that any of us can use in order to actually fold into those relationships? And the super skill is curiosity. It's about saying, what is it I think even about this? So before I can come into a conversation with you, Ingo, I have to say, what is it I have to say? What is it I think I know? What is it I'm even like, what is it I still need to learn, right? So coming up with like questions for myself, or what am I offering at the table? And then to go, and what about you? What are you thinking? And how are you thinking about it? And then, whoa, do those fit together this way or this way, right? So it's curiosity that is the super skill, and learning how to sit in a state of curiosity takes trust, that you can sit there and go, you know what, there's a pandemic going on. We don't know what in the world is going to happen next. What is it I can still do in this moment, right? So to stay in curiosity when there is a swirl of stuff going around is to center correctly and just go, stuff is going on. And then there is, what is it I know? What is it I can do? What is it I can stay calm enough on, right, to contribute? So that's the first piece. And the second piece you said, which is, okay, let's say you have 100,000 plus organization. How do I become the leader that enables all that? Do you remember that picture of the little monkey with the little lion, like the little animals? The thing that they were organized by was ideas. So we could say, you know what we need right now is, we need to change how we feed all 100,000 people at this company without going through a buffet line, because we used to do a buffet line and that's no longer technically safe. Okay, so how would we do that? And who wants to go help us think about how we feed our people? That would be a problem, right? And we could say, anybody who wants to go figure that out, go figure it out. And it could be the person at home who's really into healthy cooking, and it can be the person in the cafeteria who serves up the food. It can be this multitude of people coming together to go, yep, I have some perspective on that and I want to come help. And so you start organizing people by ideas and letting them self-organize. And all of a sudden you have a way for everyone to essentially raise their hand. and say, yep, that I'm interested in. Let me go participate. Let me see if I can contribute. And then we end up engaging all of our people and figuring out the right way forward. So that would probably be the two-prong kind of thing. Lead with curiosity, and then let people self-organize around the problem, because that will let them break down the silos and barriers of an organization to say, what is it I'm interested in? So they can all add their bit to the world.
And I love how what you just described also, like for me, sounded like you give room to others' onlyness. It's not just about like
Yes.
you saying like you have to be that, which we probably typically do in large organizations. This is for your role. This is what you got to stick to. This is your KPI. But saying like, okay, this is what we're here to accomplish. Bring yourself, bring your onlyness, and together we get there.
Right. Because each of us, right, regardless of our age or gender or color or whatever, our place in our organization, we each have something of value to add. And all progress comes from new ideas. Ideas are what pull us into the future. And so figuring out how to even just hear that thing that we believe is possible. So being curious enough about it ourselves, and then chasing it, right? Chasing an idea, even if it doesn't seem clear to other people, is a way in which we actually build what comes next. And so it's a level of curiosity, and a belief that every one of us has something of value to offer.
Great. Thank you. I think with that, we also going to end the session for today. And I hope you leave it inspired and curious, because as we just heard from Nilofer, it's kind of a starting point for us to find our onlyness and engage others in it.